Well, we're getting started here with another week of Dr. Willie Miles Children's Foundation's Let's Talk About It. It's Tuesday night. It feels like things are just going so slow around here. Hey, Jackie, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, Dr. Miles?
Hey, I am great. I am great. Are you just as tired as I am?
I
tell
am.
you, I am just, I don't know whether it's the weather or is it because it's June and almost July. I don't know if it's because of the politics. I'm not sure what it's about, but I know
It's
I'm exhausted.
everything.
Well, listen, hey, listen, before we get into our mumbling and our grumbling, I really want to say I want to thank our Facebook live stream folk who are joining us tonight. And also, of course, we want to always thank our Instagram followers for being on tonight. Just a few announcements before we actually get into the topic tonight. Of course, we are having our fundraiser, our donations drive. And I know you've been watching it kind of closely, Jackie, and we've said that June is our National Month of Giving. So we're going to ask our followers to please consider donating to us. And all you have to do is go to our website, hit donate, and make a donation to us. We are going to ask you to support us in that, and we're always here for you. We also started a couple of weeks ago, really a month ago. Jackie, tell me about the alumni group.
Right. The Alumni Club is actually a group of young people who have been with Dr. Miles actually for decades now. But they were students in one of his programs or of his mentoring at some point. And we're talking actually about just ongoing long-term, daily, weekly engagement, taking kids from, in many cases, middle school to college and beyond. And so some of those alumni have gotten together and formed a club to support the Willie Miles Children's Foundation. And what they are doing is reaching out to other alumni and asking them to do sustained and ongoing giving. And so far, there have been quite a few who have done that. And you don't have to be an alumni to join the Alumni Club. If you're interested in giving, an ongoing contribution, whether it's $5 or $500, please reach out to them and go to our page, and you'll be able to contribute.
And those are some worthy causes. I'm not going to say amen because, it is the foundation. And again, I just think that it's just good to give. To whom much is given, much is required of you. So, Jackie, we're going to get into sort of the, do you have anything that's happening in South Florida you want to tell us about?
Not too much. Everyone is just kind of getting ready for the summer at the same time that we're getting ready to go back to school. That's going to be a pretty big issue for most of us around here. So we're just kind of prepared, getting students ready. We've already had a couple of school supply drives, if you can believe that already, this past weekend while I was in Atlanta. So everyone's just gearing up for the fall.
Great. Again, I'm Dr. Willie Miles, president of Dr. Willie Miles Children's Foundation located in Atlanta, Georgia. And we always just start out talking, and because we're just so excited about the topic. And Jackie?
Yes, this topic is huge. I do think it's going to be a lot of information for a lot of people. So I think it's going to be interesting. And tonight we are talking about autism.
What's interesting? I just introduced myself. I want you to introduce yourself. We just started talking.
Oh. Is that what you wanted me to do? Okay, I am Jacqueline Hampton Clements, an educator and owner of Valley of the Giants, and co-host for tonight's conversation.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Valley of the Giants just for a little bit, Jackie. Tell the audience, what is that, and how can they refer you to school boards and so forth?
Right. So Valley of the Giants is a response to students not being aware of historically Black organizations and institutions. And we know that there is now a lot of conversation buzzword. The new buzzword is HBCU, which is really great and exciting. However, historically Black organizations and institutions extend far beyond just, our colleges and universities. So Valley of the Giants is a program that goes into schools to teach children not only about these organizations from HBCUs to D9s, but also our professional, social, and civic organizations, and gives them an opportunity to identify these giants in their communities. So through this program, they will complete projects and identify, their local HBCUs, what organizations are in their communities, historically Black organizations, be it the, NABJ, National Association of Black Journalists, National Black Accountants, engineers, lawyers, doctors, Indian chiefs, whatever it may be.
Right.
They learn quite a bit about our organizations.
Yeah. Okay. And listen, what I want to do is share something about our followers. Since we've been on Miles Children on Facebook Live, our viewership has decreased. When I had it on my personal page, it was like booming. So I told everyone to actually go and like our Miles Children page, because that's where we're going to be at this point. So I'm not trying to go back with them and tell them to come on and follow us over, because that's what we are at this point. But I noticed that on our trending for our Facebook Live, it's really down. When I had on my personal Facebook page, of course, it was high. And of course, our numbers for our Instagram are consistent. They're consistent. All right. So
Okay.
very interesting topic tonight, dealing with autism. And the reason we chose this is because a lot of parents are dealing with this and not sure what they're dealing with. And we find that many institutions, Jackie, don't tell them a whole lot about it. And I think because a lot of them don't know a whole lot about it. A whole lot
Right.
don't know a whole lot. So we're going to talk about autism tonight. And we just have so much information to share with you. So much information to share.
Yeah,
So
this is
Jackie,
a lot more
when you
than
were
our normal, a lot more information than usual.
Yeah, when you were in the schools, did you see any, like, do you recall kids being diagnosed with autism or having youngsters that you know of who may have been on the spectrum?
Yes, I did, Dr. Miles, but I will tell you that those were typically cases where the autistic characteristics were more obvious and more prevalent. And I think what we're going to talk about tonight is the range and the spectrum of autism. So I do feel like there were a lot of students and children who were not diagnosed.
Right. Okay. Well, let's just start out with some basic stuff, and we'll just play interviewer, interviewee, and we'll just do like we normally do. But this thing of autism from a mental health perspective and from my practice perspective, I'm just seeing more kids, more children being diagnosed with it, and I'm hearing parents are wanting their children younger than 3 to be diagnosed. So we're going to talk about that also. And what is this autism thing? Like, what is it? So Jackie, I think what I'll do is really start out with the basic. Like,
I
what
think we
is
should just share what is autism. It's a
and
word
not
we
only
hear, but what is it exactly?
Yeah, like what is it, and what are some of the symptoms, and is it one thing? Like, is autism a diagnosis by itself, and I'm just autistic, and or is it a number of things with comorbidities? Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit tonight.
All right.
So first of all, we're going to start out with this, that autism is a bioneurological developmental disability. And what that simply means is that it is a neurological disability dealing with mind and nerves. And you talk about how it's caused. Part of it, people say, well, oh, is it hereditary, or did the kids just get it? And we're finding out that if there's one child in your house who has who is autistic, there is a possibility that your other children may have it also. What's interesting about this autism, Jackie, is that the question is like, when do you, well, let me talk about what it is. It is a mixture of diagnosis. It's a mixture of moods. It's a mixture of behaviors. And that's what makes it so outstanding. For instance, Jackie, when a child is autistic, you said, now he's not just ADHD. He has mood disorders. He has tics. I'm talking about, like, he may twitch. He may just have intermittent explosive disorders like screaming out. He can't ever sit still. I didn't say one. It's all of them. It's all of them.
And Dr. Miles, and you can help me with this, because I definitely will be learning a lot tonight. There's also that child who is extremely withdrawn, correct?
Yes. Let me make sure my Facebook people can hear you. I'm trying to turn this up, and I want to turn you off. Okay, there you are. Great. Yeah, it is. Jack, ask that question again, please.
So the question was, in addition to the things you mentioned where the child could have very noticeable and outward behavior, there's also a spectrum, and I think you're going to cover that autism is a spectrum of behaviors. But there's also one where a child can be very withdrawn.
Well, guess what? You just answered that, because it is a broad spectrum, and that's why it's called the spectrum. What's interesting, the spectrum consists of some minor behaviors and then extreme.
Okay.
And the extreme are going to be kids who have the disabilities, the ones who have intellectual difficulties. I'm not talking about just developmentally low. I'm talking about, really cognition is very, very low. Maybe some physical disabilities. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, and I need you, Jackie, to keep me on task because I'm going to be all over the place because I'm very excited about this. Is
I was
that,
about to do that.
yeah, people, Jackie, hear autism and they freak out. Oh my God, my child's autistic. And guess what? They have no idea what it means. Let's slow it down a little bit and talk about not only what it is, but when do you start seeing symptoms? Is that
Okay.
okay?
Yeah. And I
Right.
want to look a little bit too as we do that. For clarification, you mentioned that it is a neurological, which is a brain
Yes.
um, condition,
Hmm.
and it affects the areas of. Can you tell us some of the areas that are affected? I think you did a little bit, but I know we have social interaction, communication skills. Can you finish those for us or tell us
Jackie,
more?
you're doing absolutely wonderful.
Gotcha.
Communication
Okay.
skills, cognition, and it affects the child generally. So you covered all the areas. It's going to
Okay.
be intellectual. It can be physical. It's going to be
Right.
neurological. But
And
it's
so it's going to
based
show up
upon
in some of their verbal and nonverbal
right.
communications.
It's going to be
Typically,
based upon
autistic children don't socialize like other children.
yeah. It's going to be based upon the child, of course, and the spectrum. And that's why we have
Okay.
this broad spectrum because some children may be autistic and only have one of those one diagnosis. Normally they have comorbidities, and comorbidities is simply a diagnosis and then something else accompanies it.
Right.
Are you
And
with
I
me?
see that some of that might include allergies,
Most certainly. Hmm.
asthma,
Yep.
epilepsy,
Yep.
digestive orders. And see, that's where that can be, digestive. Now, that's not cognitive. That's just the body may not digest things the same. Persistent viral infections,
Yes.
feeding disorders,
Hmm.
sensory, we talked about that, sensory integration dysfunction, and sleeping disorders. Now, that's a new one on me. I had no
Well,
idea that it would affect sleeping.
almost certainly. You're going to find that just think about the things we talked about in the past. Think about all the diagnoses and put six of them together.
Wow.
Are you with me?
That
So
I
sleep
am.
disorder is going to be a common one. Is they can't sleep throughout the night. They get up, they scream, they hear things, they have all kinds of psychoses. And what
I
happens
had
when
no
they wake up
idea.
throughout the night, they keep the whole family up,
Wow. So
including the
let's
other
talk
school,
about Dr. Miles. Is it more
including the other,
prevalent in boys?
hold up, including the other school children. And so if you
Oh,
have school children in the house, the autistic child wakes up at 3 o'clock, he or she is not going back to sleep right away. So that means the
wow.
whole house is gonna be awake. And what
And disorder.
happens, what happens is that the parents catch hell from the schools by saying, your children are not attending school. I have a case whereas the parents' children have missed 45 days because of one child who we think is autistic who is below the age of 3 and one child who is age 8 or 9 who is autistic. So she has 2 children. Are you with me? And so
Wow.
they're up a lot. And of course, if that occurs, that's gonna mess with the whole family, right? Everybody's gonna be stressed out.
Totally.
So you can imagine that house is toxic. It is full of energy, anger, and all kinds of things.
Right. Because they are
Right?
very difficult situations to deal with.
Hmm.
Um, and I was saying, let's talk about if it shows up more often in girls or boys.
Yeah, yeah, I'll do that. But I'm not moving along with you. But I want to stick
Okay.
on the comorbidities because I think you said something that was very important. That is usually
Okay.
accompanied by something, you know.
Okay.
And so parents have to know that it's not just one thing. You mentioned like not being hungry, not having an appetite, or
Right.
being an overeater,
Digestive
or
dysfunctions
being
and feeding disorders.
or having ADHD and so forth. So it's good to know that. Now, the question a parent may have is, okay, I'll ask you a question then. So how is this different than a child who has a diagnosis, who has 5 diagnoses, but is not autistic?
Good
And the
question.
difference is that the behaviors for autistic children are usually extreme. And
Okay.
there's a frequency, a higher frequency. So when we talk about the age of the child, we can start now. We don't diagnose. We're not going to diagnose under age 3 because we're comparing what is happening to the child's developmental age, right? So
That makes sense. So you
so
need some time to observe developmental.
exactly.
Right.
And there are some developmental benchmarks that occur that are normal. You know, there's going to be some hyperactivity or a lot of activity for children that are growing up. So every child who has a lot of activity doesn't mean that they are hyperactive. So we want to rule out what is normal development. We can start spotting behaviors in children under age 3. We don't diagnose. We don't
Right.
diagnose. But at age 3, we're going to diagnose because we then have a very good benchmark on where the child is.
And I think that's a good point to sit on for a minute, Dr. Miles. The behaviors can be observed before 3, but a diagnosis, an official and formal diagnosis, should not take place before the age of 3.
And what's critically important in all of this is for the early intervention. The earlier the diagnosis, the better. But no diagnosis is going to occur before age 3. Now we're going to start saying the child may look like they or act like they may on the spectrum. They have all the indicators, but we're going to start. We're not going to give an official diagnosis until age 3.
Right. And again, to your point, that's going to be as a result of multiple observations, not just one particular thing that's prevalent. It's usually a combination.
Yeah, it's going to be it's going to be a number of. And what's interesting with children who are autistic is that their comorbidities are not just like ADHD and not eating or ADHD and not sleeping. Their behaviors are going to be extreme, and people, that's why we call it the spectrum. So on the lower end of the spectrum is, quote unquote, some extreme behaviors, right? But on the higher end, you're going to find not only just intellectual disabilities, but you're going to also find some physical disabilities.
Okay.
Hey, we see your notes in front of your face. They ain't supposed to know we have notes.
Oh, you can see them?
Yes. We won't be smart. We're fooling our audience that we know all this stuff.
Oh, listen, we are smart enough to do our
Okay.
research, and we always ensure our listeners that we are not winging this, that we are using and bringing them actual research. So today is no different, but we'll try to keep the notes down.
Someone said, wow, I didn't know the depth of autism. And I think Janae said that. But Jackie, that's kind of amazing. It's because most parents don't know the depth of it.
I'm not even sure a lot of educators know. I think we just generally think of autistic children as those who are a little bit slower in their interactions, a little bit slower in their cognitive skills, and we kind of stop it there. And keep in mind, a lot of educators don't get to see what that looks like at home. So when you're talking about the sleep disorders or the eating disorders, they often may not, have an opportunity to observe that. So it is
Jackie,
good that we put that out there.
You've been in the school system and you've worked with teachers and you've been on all levels. The question I have for you, do teachers get training on like some basic like mental health disorders? Is there training on that part of their in-service or anything?
I was never trained on it. And I was in the school system for 14 years. I'm sure, you know what, Dr. Miles? They have paraprofessionals and other educators and departments who focus on, autism and that. So I'm sure those professionals are trained. But in terms of general educators, no. In terms of general educators, no.
That is a problem.
I learned a lot as a result of having a girlfriend who had a son who was autistic, and
right.
She's actually a nurse. Her husband is a surgeon, and she said to me before he was 3 that I think he may be autistic. And I said, well, why do you say that? She said he's 2 years old and he's never said the word mama.
Yeah.
And of course she had some idea, and other little things that you don't know should be there.
We know what's interesting, Jackie. One thing you said very, very important. What we don't want to do is jump that to my 2-year-old, because some kids don't actually speak sometimes to 2.5 or 3 years old, and there's no, and that's why we don't diagnose until age 3. That's the very reason. But Jackie, I want to ask you this question. I want to stay around this education thing for a while. Now, you said that kind of like, oh, well, guess what? The other departments that deal with it, and they know about, like the social workers and probably the mental health.
I just said, I don't know if they're getting training, but.
No, but I'm going to stick with the teachers. Don't you agree with me that teachers should have some in-service on this mental health one-on-one generally? What do you think?
Not only should they, but it should be required, because they do quote unquote mainstream autistic
Yeah.
children. And so that means they're in your classrooms, and you should certainly have training on what the spectrum is, for one,
Right.
what some of the behaviors you can expect, and let's hope some training on how to deal with it.
Well, I think
But
it's something that
that's not happening.
I think it's something we should investigate and provide as a service and offer it. And I need you to help me do that because schools, I ain't talking about the psychologists, because schools don't have that many psychologists. They don't have that many social workers. One social worker to 10 schools,
Yes.
with 5,000 children. So my point
Yes.
is that I think this is something where the foundation can help, and we're seeing a need there. So we're going to work on reaching out to those schools. And you can do Florida. I'll do it. I'll do the Georgia area. I'm just doing a basic Zoom 101 on what teachers should know about some general diagnoses. So they won't be saying, "Oh, guess what? They came from the hood, child. That's why they act like that." Are they poor? That's why they.
And also understanding the spectrum. I wonder to what extent this information is documented in a child's folder, so that again, we know what those particulars are for a student.
I will share with you. It is documented in the child. We're talking about school stuff now, folks. We're still on autism. It is documented in the child's records, if and only if, ready, the child has an IEP.
Oh wow!
If the child doesn't have an IEP, and it's an individualized education plan.
Instantly begs the question for me: does every autistic student have an IEP?
Now, I'm going to answer this two ways. I would be very upset if they didn't. And they should. And schools should not be taking their little time trying to get it done. Not just a child who has, see, now you got me stirred up. Not just a child who may be autistic, but a child who has any mental health disorder. Now, I sit on, I represent parents with IEPs. And just for our listening audience, as a professor at one of our local colleges, I actually taught Public Law 94-142, which talks about the responsibilities of schools legally to educate children in the least restrictive environment. Are y'all with me? So I know what the law says. The problem is that many schools, and I don't use this as an example, to my being overworked, Jackie, many schools are still lagging for a year on developing IEPs for kids, which is illegal.
And it also raises the question of the parental role in that. If the parents aren't engaging in the process of getting a proper diagnosis, and they go, "Oh, he's just a little slow."
Well, Jackie, that's one thing you've always said, though. You've always said, that they don't know.
Right.
And see, if teachers had the mental health 101, they could say, Johnny seems to be very active. Maybe he may have ADHD, or maybe there's some hyperactivity there. Not diagnosing, but I'm saying when they talk to the parents, oftentimes the parents, and I'm really off task, oftentimes the parents, when we're really not off task, oftentimes the parents meet the teachers and the whole school for the first time, ready, in an IEP.
Agreed. And what we're not talking about, and we have so many other facts to cover about this, I do have to move you forward, is the role of the medical professional in this as well. Because I'm sure that's another conversation.
Yeah, but give me some more. When you say medical professional, what do you mean? Like, you mean mental health, or you mean
the primary care physician?
Huh?
The primary care physician. So
Jackie?
The question I would have is, who is responsible for the initial diagnosis of autism? Keep in mind, we're talking about 3-year-olds. They're not in schools yet.
Let's do this right here.
4-year-olds, 5-year-olds.
I think your question is not the original diagnosis; it's the original referral.
Well, we can say it's both, but
this thing said my battery is dying. How is this happening? All right, I don't want to lose y'all. All right.
Yeah, I keep mine plugged in.
Plugged. I think I'm plugged in here, but I'm not sure. I gotta make sure I don't leave y'all. All right, let's move forward. It's the original referral. The original referral. All referrals really should originate with the parent.
Okay, so that's the original referral. Now, I have a 3-year-old. They're not in school yet. Who's doing the diagnosis and officially diagnosing the child as autistic?
You ready? If a parent has a child who is on the spectrum, that parent, he or she, is going to be running to find a doctor to try to, not a primary physician, but a mental health practitioner. You know the difference, and you never
Okay.
rest.
So that is actually diagnosed by a mental health.
It's going to be a licensed mental health professional.
Wow.
That's
And you're
what
suggesting that they're going to be hard to find.
but Jackie, that's where all the diagnoses come from. You know, no doctors. We had to not fight. We had to train doctors on how to understand when a referral is needed for mental health. If you go to your doctors now, there's a question on the original form that says, is everything well in your house? Do you think there are any mental health issues? That's relatively new. It wasn't on before.
Right, along with safety issues, safety questions as
right,
well.
exactly. So we caused that because doctors can't even prescribe psychotropic drugs anymore. My thing got me nervous here. Let me keep going. I'm gonna keep rolling now, y'all.
Well, Dr.
Keep
Miles,
rolling.
take a second and make sure it's properly plugged in, because you
Yeah,
have
let me
your
make
phone,
sure.
but it sounds like it's not getting the power it needs. So just take a second and do that, because if you're out, the show's out.
No, it's not. You better carry on.
I do have notes.
Yeah, but you better fake it till you make it.
I will.
Let's see what we can do. Let me see if this helps.
I have data here.
Okay, guess what? We're good. Let's go.
Okay.
I got a major power source. All right, let's go. Okay. You're doing good, Jackie. Thank you.
We have lots to cover.
Let's go.
Boys, girls, equal. Give us some information about that, please.
Okay, Jackie, Janae has a question here. I'm not sure you can see it, but she says,
what about the foster adopted children where this is not specified? Oh, and we as adopted parents are starting from scratch in this area. Wow. Good question. So that question is, if you're receiving a foster child and you have no information, where do you start?
Well, ask Janae, first of all, why is she trying to cause problems? Why is she trying to cause problems, first of all? Y'all keep adopting those children. Keep adopting those children, not knowing anything about them. Janae, but legally, if there is the child has a diagnosis in the foster care, you have a right to know what that diagnosis is. And Janae, you should be getting the child's file with all his medical or her medical information in it. So I'm not sure where you are, but don't accept any child without having the full medical workup. And most certainly do not adopt any child without having an understanding of who you're adopting and what you may have to deal with. Are you with me? But because love conquers all, but I need to know what I'm loving.
Well, see, Dr. Miles, so I think there could be another issue here. If a child is in foster care, could they be moving around such that that diagnosis has not taken place?
Okay. Now, I'll share with you, that's a great question. And the question is, have that diagnosis for autism not taken place? But ready for this? A lot of those children have diagnosis and comorbidities, which means more than one diagnosis. But let's be clear. A child who's on the spectrum, folk, you're going to know the difference between 5 diagnoses. Because the child's going to be super busy. The child may have some neurological issues. The child may, as you said, Jackie, may not have good communications. The child's not going to be able to sleep at night. When you have all those, we're going to rule out adjustment disorders. We're going to rule it out after the child's been there so long, right? But
so really what we're saying is when you're looking at a child that has these multiple scenarios, if they don't already have a diagnosis on the autistic spectrum, then we need to be getting the professional information to make that work.
The foster parent should say, I think this child may be autistic.
Right.
And that initiates the testing. I'm sorry, not testing. That's not testing. You know why? Because you know what's amazing about
diagnosis, right?
You know what it is? There's no testing for this.
Right.
There's no blood work that says the child's autistic. It's really our trained eyes. It's really our trained eyes that tells us what the child is. And what we do, Jackie, and our audience, we actually look at the child's individual diagnosis and look at what extreme he or she is on those individual ones. So if the child is extreme on 3 out of the 5, we're going to say spectrum. We're going to say spectrum. If he is extreme on 5 out of the 5, we're going to say not only on the spectrum, but now let's get some occupational therapy for him, speech therapy. Let's get some other things for them. All right?
Right. So it's a professional mental health community that is well trained and aware of this. So I'm going to move us forward
Wait,
because
wait,
we're
no.
going to run
Why
out
you
of
all,
time.
no? Why are you always throwing a loop in things? You just do
I'm
use less word. You use less words. You just said so. It's a mental health professional that is well trained. Now just work with me. Now I'm in the field now, and what we're advocating for, Jackie, is for them to become well trained. I'm gonna be honest with you. Ready? Not many people in our profession who are the therapists.
Okay, so
you know,
this field is wide open. So we need
you know where I'm
teachers.
going, right?
We need
Hey,
everyone to be more trained. Yes,
you know where I'm going, right?
I do.
So
Lay it on me.
oftentimes our doctors won't go with the diagnosis because what the doctor, our mental health doctors are looking for is information from the parent and from the practitioner, what we see and what we say.
Okay.
Um, I can tell you right away, Jack, when I get the 4-year-old who has just got a whole lot going on and speech is not too well and they're all over the place mentally and they're looking every place. Those are some of the signs.
Okay.
Okay, you can
And
move
you
on now.
just brought us to a good point. Autism is diagnosed 4 times more in boys than girls. 4 times more.
And
I don't think there's a lot of research on why that's the case.
there is not, Jackie. There's not,
Okay.
and we don't know.
Now this is also interesting. Its prevalence is not affected. Yay, finally. Its prevalence is not affected by race, region, or socioeconomic status.
You
That's
know,
important.
again, I ain't did no research on it, but I would love to see. I'm sure there's a lot of research on it. I would just love to see if there is a prevalence. I would, because before we've not seen seen significance
Mm-hmm.
in Black children having autism. We
So we'd
see it
like to
now.
see some more research on that.
We see it now, though. We see a
Right.
lot of Black children and children of color who are being diagnosed with autism. All right.
Okay. Now here's another interesting fact. Now this is also something I heard, that autism does not exist in third world countries. So that's something else for us to
Mhm.
consider. But in the United States, 1 in 54 children, okay, is diagnosed. And those numbers are considered alarming.
Jackie,
1 in 54.
that equates to 3 million children per year.
Right. And so, imagine let's just say that's 2 in every 100 about. So that kind of helps parents to know with your schools and the size. And of course, those are just averages. Those numbers can be higher. And I do know that they are higher in some areas. But that's just general information.
But I think
So,
the key to this is really early intervention and getting help as soon as you can. The earlier, the better.
a good news, it does not affect life expectancy,
Okay, I'm gonna talk
according to
about
the
that.
data.
I'm gonna talk about that a little bit. Um, it doesn't affect, and parents, please don't get alarmed. It doesn't affect life expectancy except in these cases. And these are cases that result in drownings and
Or other
are
types of accidents here.
exactly. And so we're seeing that, according to what we've read thus far, is they look at children with autism lifespan expectancy up to 32 versus 64 for the general population.
And what
And
they're
it's
saying
not,
is that mortality risk
yes,
is
exactly. And
higher
it's
in the areas of drowning and accidents.
now why are all my live
Twice as
stream
high.
cameras trying to find low battery? Let's see what we got. You keep talking. Something is going on.
I
Somebody's trying to
will.
sabotage me.
Right. And
Okay.
so also, let's note, there's currently no cure for autism, although with early intervention, as you have mentioned from the beginning, Dr. Miles, and treatment, the diverse symptoms related to autism can be greatly improved, and in some cases completely overcome with the occupational therapy
Yes.
that you mentioned. So that early intervention is the key to managing and minimizing, mitigating autistic behaviors.
Yeah.
Okay.
But let's talk about that for a second. We just talked some very serious stuff that parents not even aware of. And Jackie, I know of cases where I keep calling you like you know who I'm talking to, our audience, and that is that some parents, are not careful supervisors of children who are autistic. Like for instance, they'll walk out the door without saying where they're going. They'll open the door. One case we have the child walks out of the house at night. So in children who are autistic, you got to take care. You got to do some extra child proofing, like making sure the locks on the doors are higher than they can reach, and
Right.
higher than them standing in a chair to reach.
Right. And
Make
Dr.
sure
Miles, when you add to that one of the common features, which is about 40% of children with autism do not speak.
yeah, that is just, and that's also on the higher end. So that gives us an indication that there are quite a few children on the higher end.
Right.
On the higher end of the spectrum.
Right.
So,
and of
Jackie,
course, makes the job of parenting much more difficult when you're dealing with a child that just doesn't speak at all.
well, the thing about it too is that let's just give it. Let's talk about this just a little bit. See, I have a problem. This problem I have with is the parents who says, "You better open your mouth and speak." Now, you better. What I'm saying is that the parent not realizing that is not he.
That it's a neurological condition. Right.
And Jackie, that's why a lot of our children go untreated early.
Mm-hmm.
And
again, you would think this is something that would be addressed with prenatal and all the other things, because these are things you need to look out for, as you mentioned early on. And here's another thing that makes it really difficult, Dr. Miles, is that no two people with autism are alike.
Yeah.
So you don't have a road map to run on. You
one could be speech, the other could be intellectual. Are you with me? Or cognition. Yeah. I got Janae gives me all these little sounds. She said, "Wow, no cure." Let me talk about that first. There is no cure for the general diagnosis of autism, but there is treatment for the individual diagnosis.
And
that makes sense.
Yes. Yep.
That makes sense. Like
yes,
for the ADHD or the anxiety. So they'll get treatment for those, and that will then help
strategies and techniques
reduce the symptoms.
To manage.
Right.
Okay. Very, very important. Autism is the fastest growing developmental disorder, yet most underfunded. And let's just go ahead and add most misunderstood.
Yeah.
But again, because no two situations are alike, every child has to be treated specially.
But Jackie, we hear this thing about autism. We've heard a lot about it more recently, because really many movie stars' children have started getting being diagnosed, right? But to me, this sounds like a national alarm to me. I mean, it should be an alarm going off that says, guess what? We have this many children who are diagnosed with autism. It's not curable. It is treatable. There should be some strategy on how to, just work with me for a second. There'll be some strategy on Education 101 for teachers and those who work with children, and Education 101 for medical practitioners. Yes. And there is some now, but I just think there should be more education and awareness, because the earlier I can treat that child, the better my chances are of him being okay. Or him or her being okay.
And the fact, Dr. Miles, that it has to be ongoing. See, autism shows up as one of those things that becomes cute and a little buzzword for a minute, especially when celebrities are engaged. I think,
right.
Is it Holly Robinson Peete? I think she did a lot of work with autism, because I think one of her sons is autistic. Just a lot of tremendous work in terms of awareness. But these campaigns come and go.
Right.
And to your point, this should be mandated annual ongoing information training, especially for educators and medical professionals.
Jackie, did I hear you mention that autism is the fastest growing but most underfunded?
You did. The fastest growing developmental disorder, yet the most underfunded. You sure did.
It's just alarming. It's just alarming.
Once again, Dr. Miles, why these conversations and organizations like the Dr. Willie Miles Children's Foundation, where we make children a priority, are important, because this is something that affects a lot of children, and it's really not getting any attention. Okay.
It is not getting the attention it needs, I tell you.
Okay. So let's see. We want to make sure we've covered some things. People with autistic spectrum disorder often have problems, we mentioned, with social, emotional, and communication skills. They might repeat certain behaviors. They might not want to change. They may have a problem with changes in their daily routines. And Dr. Miles, we haven't gotten to it yet, but on that spectrum is also something called Asperger's. And we want to talk about that high functioning situation.
Yeah, with Asperger's, it is, some people use that, of course, synonymously with the spectrum, because that's what it's really called. When you talk about Asperger's, you're really getting into, the Asperger's, of course, is named after a person. So the point is that the diagnosis is a little bit more severe. And we then have refined the definition, for lack of better words. When we have them on the spectrum, we have a list of things, a list of comorbidities that occur. For children who are on the Asperger, they may be confined to a wheelchair. They may be not being able to move, walk, talk, and a whole bunch of other things.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk. We talked a little bit about the diagnosis. You mentioned that it's over a period of time. It's a process. It says screening. That's the word I think we were looking for before. Not testing, but screening. It can sometimes be detected as early as 18 months. However, the research supports your statement that it is often not officially diagnosed until a child is much older. So again, that's to say that we can start to see some signs at an early age, if we know what those signs are. Again, back to training. And it also supports that family history may increase the likelihood. I think you touched on that.
I want to go back to the diagnosis again. We want to make sure there's careful observation at 1 to 18 months, and then age two, we're going to start seeing some clear things that are occurring. But and of course, I don't know any professional that I know of, Jackie, at this point, who's going to diagnose it too. But the research says that a trained professional, because what's the whole point of diagnosing when you can't treat it?
Right.
Are you with me?
Yes.
We're not giving a 2-year-old medication.
Right. Good point. And it's hard to do, some forms of therapy with a 2-year-old. And that's why it says here, it can be considered reliable. However, they don't receive a final diagnosis until much older. So we really need to stress that a final diagnosis happens older.
Right.
And again, it's not always easy to make that diagnosis. And of course, it's referred to as ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. It's not easy to make that diagnosis.
But the problem, Jackie, the problem with that though, and that kind of, it kind of unnerves us. And I don't know many therapists who want to take a 2-year-old, first of all. But we're conflicting with early treatment, but we can't get a diagnosis.
We don't want early diagnosis, but we do want early treatment.
Right. So it's kind of like, and we're showing that the earlier the treatment, the better the outcome's going to be.
But I think what we're saying, Dr. Miles, if there is any consistency, is that start to observe signs early. Be aware of what those might be, so that diagnosis can be made as soon as possible.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Important to mention, you did touch on this. There's no lab test for it. Doctors rely on observing the behaviors of their young children and listening to the concerns of their parents. Parents, we need you paying attention. Don't be in denial. Don't just go, oh, he's just special. Pay attention. Know the signs.
Another thing too, we got to get our parents from using this one word, and I don't know what it means. I said, can you be a little bit more descriptive? He's just bad. She just bad. Can you be a little bit more descriptive? Can you tell me?
Won't sit down. Can't tell them what to do.
Right. What is the child doing? Can't sit down, having sleepless nights. And guess what, parents? The more information you give that doctor, the better the diagnosis can be. I'm telling you. It makes a world of difference. We get clients who come in, can you tell us something about the child? Like what? What does he do? Oh, he just run around all day. Can you give me a little bit more? Does he sleep well at night? I don't know. I be asleep. Do you? So the point is, parents, observe your children and give us as much data, because the more you give us, guess what? The better the diagnosis and the better the treatment.
Right.
All right.
And so let's talk a little bit about what that diagnosis observation will entail, again, over a period of time. Developmental screening takes a closer look at how your child is developing, keyword that parents need to understand, and that can come in the form of questionnaires, right?
You know, one thing you mentioned before, Jackie, though, and it's in our earlier discussion, you always been the education advocate that says, like, these are things that parents should do. But there are some books out there, some very small books, some very thin, like 5 pages. You ain't got to make no books. Just Google it and know
Right.
what your child should be doing developmentally.
Well, that's the first step, really. Know what it should look like, so when it looks a little different, you know, the radar goes off, and you
Right,
say, "Hey, is
exactly.
this something I need to look more into?"
You know,
Okay.
I think I also, and I know we're beating a dead horse, but you know, to me, I would like to tell people who talk to me about my child, I like to tell them what I see versus them telling me what they see. Because they only see the child for 45 minutes to 2 hours. I mean, I'm saying like in observations. But the
And
parents
it
are
says, we just said,
24/7.
they have to rely on the observations and information from parents. They have to your point. I'm seeing this child in a very small window, and you see them 24 hours a day.
Right.
Very important.
And also in
And
different situations.
right. And I think a lot of times, without parents mentioning that, let's say you go to your medical professional and all you mention is their physical concerns. You don't want to talk about how active they are, or if they're not
Right.
sleeping correctly, or even if they're not talking, you know,
Right.
as much as possible. Because from your information, from the parents' information, then the professionals can go into behavioral screening and use some formal
Exactly.
questionnaires.
Exactly.
They can use checklists. They can include development, the language development,
Right.
as you pointed out, movement. What is their thinking, behavior, and emotions? Let's not leave that out.
But
So,
one thing I like to see though, Jackie, I'd like to see parents are really, and you've been talking about this for the last year, is be the primary expert on your child. You'll
period,
be the
hands down.
you'll be the expert.
And
You
Dr. Miles, I think there are far too many people who think otherwise.
right.
They think that they feed them, clothe them, put a roof over their head, but doctors are supposed to do this, the psychologists are supposed to do that. Parents, you are the number one doctor, teacher, caregiver, everything for your children. I mean, think about it. They're with you forever. I don't care who the doctor is or what they do. They are with your children for a limited amount of time. You are the one that has to transfer it from one doctor to the next, from the doctor to the school to back home. So parents, it really is your responsibility to be aware. And sometimes, Dr. Miles, it's important because parents have to make sure doctors are doing what they're supposed to do.
Right. Exactly. I feel kind of embarrassed, y'all. I got to tell you what something that's happening on our Facebook Live. I mean, people are waiting for me to bring them on. I thought they were just on. Anyway, I'm gonna learn how to do all this technology.
You'll
I'm
get
not.
it.
I'm gonna get it
Um,
straight soon. Let's keep moving.
let's see. We are running out of time. You want to talk a little bit about medications?
Yeah, the medications. You know, I think this is really kind of simple, Jackie. We know, first of all, the baseline, right? There is no medication for autism. There is no medication for that. What we're going to do
Right.
is treat the individual behaviors that we see. And there are medications that doctors do prescribe. I do want to say that I do not want our audience to think that I am a psychiatrist or a licensed professional. What I am a mental health professional who provides therapeutic services anywhere I can provide it through a company. All right. So I'm saying that to say that I want y'all to say, oh, well, Dr. Miles said A, B, and C. You need to seek your medical professional, and that usually is a licensed psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Right.
All
And
right.
Dr. Miles shared research that says A, B, C, D, and E.
Yeah.
And Janae, you make another excellent point. Some do not want to accept that anything is wrong with their children, and they may not address these issues. That's just huge. And it's another situation that we really have to work as a society to avoid and eliminate, because it's important for the child's development. You know, I think one of the most well-known scenarios of autism is in the movie. What's the name of the movie where
Don't ask me that.
Forrest Gump?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Forrest
Yeah.
Gump.
Mm-hmm.
A classic example of limitations, but not limited.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what parents need to see, that they can be functional. But all of that, if you recall, his mother fought for his diagnosis and for his treatment.
What I want to do, I sort of want to address some of the medications. I'm going to give you the broad categories of them. Of course, we have serotonin, the inhibitors. These are antidepressants. That's going to help the child calm, but it's going to also um, treat the child's imbalances, his chemical imbalances. Then we're going to have some, of course, psychoactive or antipsychotic medications. And these are, and people, all these medications, Jackie, they can only be prescribed by a psychiatrist. And so if you got medical doctors doing this stuff, folk, you may want to give a second thought to that. They should not be prescribing any medications dealing with any psychotic medications. Also, they're going to be stimulants, and these are the same medications that will decrease hyperactivity. So I think we're sort of like going around in a circle. I think the answer is there's no one pill you can take for autism, but there are a number of medicines and medication treatment that will help decrease some of those symptoms.
And again, I have to say here, this is where parents and educators need to be aware of what the medications are intended to do, because unfortunately, no one's perfect. Some doctors may misdiagnose. They may hear that it treats autism, just go, here, try this. But it may not be the particular behavior that your child has. So we also need to observe, and this is across the board, it's not just for autism. Anytime you're taking medication, you need to observe the effect, and you need to determine, is it helping? Yes. Or is it harming? Is it addressing the issue for which it was prescribed? Because that's not an automatic thing.
So Jackie, I want to ask you, what have you got out of this whole discussion tonight? Have you got any, is this some new stuff for you?
Honestly, as an educator, yes. One, that this requires much more attention than it is getting. And two, that it really is as much a medical condition as any other. So the degree to which we're ignoring it, it's just unacceptable, or not being educated on it. But even as, a parent, although my children are adults, but, grandchildren, anything, there's a lot that we should know about autism so that we can support early diagnosis and improve development.
Folk, I would just say to y'all that this is a very complex diagnosis. It affects your entire family. Any diagnosis affects the entire family. But folk, I'm going to share with you, this really affects it. And I tell parents that if you have a child in your house who's diagnosed with autism, I'm recommending that everyone in the house receive therapy. And receive counseling if that makes you feel better. Yeah. But the point is that when one person in the house is sick, guess what?
Everybody in the house is sick.
Everybody in the house is sick. It affects everyone. So don't be afraid, folk. We're here to help you. And so one commercial said, if you don't use me, find somebody.
Right. Because again, Dr. Miles, this is a lifetime diagnosis. So, all sorts of things need to be put into place and considered when thinking about the development of that person and how they can live their most productive life. Exactly.
Jackie, it's always been wonderful being with you. I hope we help someone out there. I just really hope that we are doing what our mission says, that children are a priority, and making sure that parents are getting the best possible. I am really going to ask both our Facebook and our Instagram followers, folks, please tell people about us. Don't just keep coming week after week yourself. Tell people about us. Don't forget, this is, we're actually, Jackie, you look at, we're kind of like really saving lives.
That's undeniable. And also, I ask our audience to think of sort of the disservice you do when you know of people who may be dealing with this, who may work in this field, and you're not sharing the information. So it's
Right.
not, it's not really about those of us who are already here, those of us who are having those conversations, but we know that there are a lot of people out there struggling with so many things. And this information is just helpful. It helps children and it helps the adults who are working with those children. So we want you guys to kind of, consider yourself co-host, consider yourselves like ourselves in the community trying to help, and make sure you reach out to at least one person, and say, hey,
Yeah.
I know this might be something you're interested in. Come join us on Tuesday night. It's quick, it's easy, it's kind of fun. They're a little crazy, but you'll get some good information.
All right. So, folk, don't forget it's our National Month of Giving. And I'm not talking about giving to somebody else. I'm talking about giving to the foundation. Go and donate to us. Yeah, I feel like a telethon. But folks, seriously, take some
That's
time
not a
and
bad
donate
idea, telethon.
that $5 to us, the $10 to us, the $10,000. Donate to us. We're bringing this to you every week at no cost to you. It really is a community service for us, but it does cost us. It does cost us. Also,
And I'm going to go ahead and say this too, Dr. Miles. I don't think there's any place else where your donations can affect children more. You all, those of you who are on regularly, you know the topics we're covering. You know how important it is. There are a million people giving out backpacks and pencils and paper. Okay? Donating here is covering those topics that many others don't want to talk about. And you guys know our spectrum has been really broad. All of them just so important. So we want you to give or consider giving in areas that are not otherwise being served. And that's one of our missions here, is to make sure that we're dealing with the difficult topics, that we're giving parents information they're not getting anywhere else.
all right, folks, much love to you, our Facebook Live audience, and also our Instagram Live. Let's talk about it. We'll see you next week, folks. Take care. Go to the foundation. Push that donate button right now. Jackie, love you. See you next week, y'all.
Love you too. Have a good evening. Have a good week.